All right, so I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Raisa Marks. I'm the Government Relations Director for CCEDNet, the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. Nice to see you all today. Just a note, as you just heard, we will be recording the session today. So if you don't want to be recorded, just turn off your video, but otherwise we would like to see your face, so it's nice to see you. We'd like to get a sense of who's joined us. So Hannah is going to share in the chat a link to a Google Doc where you can, if you wouldn't mind, just clicking on that link and putting in your name and your organization in one of the lines in the spreadsheet. That would be very helpful for us to get a sense of who's here. So there's the link now. Thanks, Hannah. And just before we get started, I know it's a little bit awkward sometimes to do a land acknowledgement when we're all virtual and we're all in different places. So I just want to, I don't know if you have all seen the website native-land.ca. So it's native-land.ca. It's a great website that shows not only the territories, but also the languages and the treaties that cover Turtle Island. So wherever you are on Turtle Island, maybe we'll just take a minute to think about the people that have been here since time immemorial. And if you don't know much about the people that have inhabited where you are, then I recommend checking out that website to learn more. So with that, I think we'll get started, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so you should be seeing the screen now. So welcome. This is key policy recommendations for strengthening community economies, and I'll just get us started. We have a bunch of speakers here today, but they'll all come on in due course. So to start, I'll just talk a little bit about CCEDNet, or the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. So we're a national association of organizations and people across Canada committed to strengthening communities by creating economic opportunities that really do good for social and environmental conditions in the communities. So our vision is that sustainable and inclusive communities all across the country are directing their own social, economic, and environmental futures. There's two kind of groups that we convene that I want to talk about a little bit today. So the first is our Policy Council. So our Policy Council is made up of our members. So again, members can be organizations or individuals, and it's for those members that are interested in national policy work. And it provides a platform to share information, collaborate, coordinate actions to more effectively advance a pan-Canadian CED-related policy agenda, so CED being Community Economic Development. And we have, over the last, I would say, 2 to 4 months, we've been developing our latest version of our policy priorities, our national policy priorities, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. There are 7 national policy priorities that we think are really important to strengthening community economies, and you'll hear about all 7 of them today. The other group that we convene that I wanted to tell you a little bit about is the People-Centered Economy group. So that's a bit different in that its membership is made up of national, provincial, and sectoral organizations whose memberships are made up of social economy organizations. So some of the logos are there. That's not all the organizations that are members, but a lot of them. And so they're organizations whose members are charities or nonprofits, social enterprises, co-ops, and together those groups, as I said, CCEDNet is the convener for that as well, and we provide a platform to share information and collaborate to advance the social economy in Canada, or the people-centered economy, as the name would say. And that group has also developed 3 recommendations for COVID-19 recovery and the post-COVID economy. And those 3 recommendations are part of the 7. So the 7 national policy priorities that we have, 3 of them are the ones that have been developed by the People-Centered Economy group. And so those will be part of what we talk about today. And so all the different speakers that you're going to hear from today are either members of the Policy Council or of the People-Centered Economy Group, or some of them might be both. So that's who you're going to hear from today. Now, just a note about COVID, because it's COVID times that we're in. And we really, as I said, we've developed these policy priorities over the last few months. And so it's been in the context of COVID that we've developed them. And as we all know, COVID has laid bare many of the weaknesses in our society and our systems that we have, and we do need to work together to find a way forward that's more sustainable, more inclusive, and more equitable. And so our sort of thought about that is, well, why not use CED as a foundation for COVID recovery? Because CED already fosters inclusive communities, already fosters economic revitalization, local ownership of resources, job creation, poverty reduction, environmental stewardship, basically all of the things that we've been talking about for just recovery, green recovery. All those things can be achieved through CED. Just hold on one second. You need to go away.
No, can I use this, Mama?
So I think, yeah, that's what we're thinking. Why not use CED as the foundation to build back better? And as we're thinking about our policy priorities, there are sort of three overarching themes that we've identified, or lenses that we need to look through. And I'm going to pass it over to Mike Toy, who's the executive director of CCEDNet, to speak about those. Go ahead.
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, so when the Policy Council was preparing the priorities that we're going to be hearing about today, they identified three subjects that were seen as really cross-cutting and fundamental. And the idea is that all of our efforts need to recognize and be contributing to these three priorities. And so we included them as sort of a preamble to the policy priorities document before all the specific recommendations. And they build on the work that CCEDNet's board has been doing over the last year on a new theory of change that some of you may have seen was presented at the annual general meeting back in June. So the first one is right relationships and redress for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, including the legal implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The second is taking an intersectional lens to understand the multiple barriers that different people and groups can face that prevents their full participation in the economy and society. Intersectionality is it's kind of a big word, but it really, I think, refers to a reality that those of us involved in community economic development recognize for a long time, that the interconnected nature of social labels or categorizations such as race, class, and gender have multiple impacts on individuals or groups, often creating overlapping systems of discrimination and disadvantage. And CED tends to focus on people or communities that face particular barriers. So intersectionality is a helpful lens for understanding and addressing those dynamics. And finally, the third point is the increasingly visible, I'd say, existential crisis facing all of us as the ecological and climate disasters that we're seeing unfold. Our strategies, the CED policy priorities, and the way that we implement them need to be contributing to just transition, circular and renewable economic alternatives that embed equity in transition. So those are the three cross-cutting issues that underpin all the rest. And we want to remind ourselves and to keep those in forefront in our thinking as we work on specific policy priorities. The advantage of is in fact that they are in fact complementary and mutually reinforcing. So there's lots of exciting actions that are already underway and tons of opportunities for powerful change. So that's the context. Is that okay, Risa?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mike. All right, so I think now we'll get into those 7 key policy recommendations. So the first one that I'm going to speak about is social innovation and social finance. So just a little bit of background here. In 2017, the federal government identified a number of experts in the social economy realm to work together to co-create some policy recommendations around social innovation and social finance. And so they did that. They spoke. They consulted with Canadians and came up with a great report with 12 recommendations that cover all sorts of things from procurement to social finance to ecosystem development, capacity building. The 12 different recommendations that really would enable and empower communities to do this good work that in their communities. So our recommendation here, and the government, I should say, has committed to implementing a strategy, but they have not moved very much on these recommendations, and they have committed some money towards it, but most of that money has not rolled out yet, and the money that has rolled out is set to expire at the end of March. So our recommendation here is that we really want that to continue, so that we want the social innovation and social finance strategy to be fully implemented, addressing all 12 of those great recommendations from the report. And importantly, as part of that, we want to make sure that equity-seeking groups play a leading role in the implementation and the subsequent evolution of the strategy. And that's really important because it's important for the people who it's meant to serve have a voice in how it's rolled out. So that builds on the existing expertise in communities and amplifies that and values it. So what we're doing on this policy priority is we currently have an advocacy campaign. The website is there, sisfs.ca. We are asking people to contact their MPs to talk to them about social innovation and social finance, or write an email to them about social innovation and social finance. We want to raise awareness among all MPs across the country about this file. It's really not a partisan issue. It's one that all parties can get behind. And in particular, we want the MPs to be writing letters to Minister Husson and Minister Freeland, who are the two kind of key ministers on this file, to be putting budget allocations for this strategy in the next budget, so the 2021-22 budget. So that's the website. That's where our campaign is living. And the other thing we've been doing on this is just tons and tons of meetings. So we've been meeting with MPs, senators, civil servants, ministers, just trying as many people as will listen to us, and us being, CCEDNet, as well as partners in the People-Centered Economy Group and our Policy Council, to just try to keep this on the radar and make sure the government moves forward with it. So that's the first one. The second policy priority, I'm going to pass this over to Wendy Keats, the Executive Director of the Cooperative Enterprise Council of New Brunswick, to speak about this one. Go ahead, Wendy.
Great, thanks, Raisa. So there's been a lot of work done in the social finance sector, as we know, with some really creative and innovative programs and opportunities to grow community investment. And a lot of them have been more the institutional focus, so foundations and institutional investors, philanthropists, and so on. And so one of the areas that we felt hadn't been explored as much as it could be was in what we're calling community investment organizations. And those tend to be community investment funds where individuals can invest and create pools of capital that can be invested into different kinds of cooperative and social enterprise activities. And so through discussions with ESDC, we were able to get some funding, and CCEDNet is a host to a project that has two other partners. So we have the BC Community Impact Investment Coalition with Eden Yesh, who's leading a Western lens on this, and then the Cooperative Enterprise Council is the partner in the Atlantic provinces. Now, we have had here in the Maritimes a Community Economic Development Investment Fund program. It's a tax credit where any individual that lives in the province can get a significant tax credit. In New Brunswick, for example, if you invest in one of these funds, you get 50% of your investment back through provincial income tax payable. They're also RRSP eligible, so you can self-direct your existing investments into these funds and keep the credits of both. So of course, they're very appealing. However, they're securities-based. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to help build capacity for people to use these. And it's existed in Nova Scotia now for about 20 years, but there's never been an economic impact study to show what the return on investment for government is. And so part of this project that we're doing is that. We're currently in the midst of an economic impact study. And we've also brought together what we call regional and national learning communities. So in the East, we have a large group of folks that have been involved actively in raising funds using these kinds of tools. And we're working together to look at what are ways that we can advance them, what are the challenges. A couple of them are up for review by the provinces coming up in the very near future. And so we're trying to influence policy and expand those programs. And so we're also learning together. And we also have a national learning community that's doing that as well. We're jointly developing promotional materials guides, sort of dummy guides on how to use these programs, and at the same time sort of building some awareness of the programs and the capacity for groups to use it. So that's a quick overview.
That's great, Wendy. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to move on to the third priority area, which is about procurement. And I'm going to ask David LePage, Managing Partner with Bi-Social Canada.
Great. Thanks, Raisa. And thanks to CCEDNet for convening this. This is great to try to integrate all these different issues that are going on into one conversation, because we always accuse everyone of being too siloed, and we have to try not to do that ourselves. Bi-social really looks at the concept that the marketplace offers an amazing community economic development tool, especially to meet the policy imperatives that we're talking about and that Mike outlined above. Because what we believe is that the market has actually transitioned over the last few hundred years from being a place where we build community to a place where we just build personal wealth. So our objective is actually to transition the marketplace into something that actually creates community capital, not just individual capital. So rather than a means of economic transactions, that the marketplace actually becomes a means for building communities. And that happens by leveraging the spend that's already going on. So when we think about it, the government collectively spends about $200 billion a year buying stuff, but 80% of that happens at the local level. So how do we take advantage of those opportunities and move that into community well-being? And I'll just give a couple examples where I think communities have really led that process successfully. Calgary and the work that Momentum did 2 or 3 years ago in getting Calgary Council to explore social procurement, just that first initial thing, just explore it, has now led to a policy at Council, as well as a multi-stakeholder advisory process that actually has moved the City of Calgary purchasing to start to explore social procurement on every request for proposal they do. And so they're really moving forward, but it started with Momentum, a CCEDNet member saying, this is an issue, how do we move it? The other example from a more rural example would be the coalition of 22 rural and remote communities on Vancouver Island and Sunshine Coast that work together to create social procurement tools and resources. And that's called, if you want to look at it, the Coastal Communities Social Procurement Initiative, or CCSPI.ca. Both of these are really great examples of how community is driving the use of existing spending to create community value. Bi-social is around this process in order to provide the supports on both for supplier readiness. We now have a whole new program on supplier readiness training, as well as working on the policy and implementation side. So I'll leave it there, Risa.
Great. Thank you very much, David. So for the next one, I'm going to hand it to Hazel Corcoran, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation. Go ahead, Hazel.
Thank you, Raisa, and thanks to CCEDNet and the People-Centered Economy Group for convening this. we've really appreciated the opportunity to collaborate and be mutually supportive in that space of the people-centered economy group. I also wanted to mention that we've benefited very much from being involved in the research project called Business Co-op Conversions, based out of the U of Toronto and Sherbrooke. You can find their website at coopconvert.ca. And there's lots of research there and more to come. So in terms of the economic crisis caused by COVID, we strongly believe that increasing economic democracy in the workplace is the way to build the economy, a good way to build the economy back better. And I'll just mention, we include both worker co-ops and multi-stakeholder co-ops with substantial worker control. Those have a higher survival rate than other businesses, as do all co-ops. And in particular, worker co-ops have greater job stability, significant potential to alleviate income inequality, and improve quality of work because workers have greater control. There are currently about 1.2 million small and medium enterprises in Canada, and about 3/4 of the owners claim that they'll retire in the next decade, with fewer than 10% having a succession plan. Obviously, COVID changes the dynamics completely for many people, and businesses are threatened for all sorts of new reasons. But we do believe the current situation creates a lot of room for thinking outside the box and creating new solutions that will allow some more of those businesses to be saved than otherwise could be and made stronger. So primarily what we're doing is advocating that the federal government invest in a program led by CWCF and delivered with partners, some of whom are on the call, to save jobs and businesses through worker co-op and multi-stakeholder buyouts. The partners we would work with include our main Quebec-based federation, Le Réseau Co-op, the provincial co-op associations, individual co-op developers, and others. The primary components that we're seeking are an investment of capital into our Tenacity Works Fund and funding for technical assistance by skilled co-op developers. Also funding for promotion, since we know that this model is not nearly well enough known in the business community. Over 5 years, with full funding that we're seeking, we could assist 183 businesses to convert to co-ops. So we've been having lots of meetings too, mostly with political staff in a wide variety of ministries. And those are continuing. Our proposal is quite large at 70 million in the fund. And truly we came up with that number because that's the number approximately that we have under administration in an RSP program that Wendy was speaking of around the community investment funds. And there is additional funding for other elements, but we are very, very willing to pilot it as at a smaller amount. And we feel that funds could come through the Social Finance Fund or elsewhere. And outside of the advocacy realm, we have some capacity to support conversions already. And I put an example up of when we worked with the Glitter Bean Cafe Co-op in Halifax. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Hazel. So our next one, I'm going to pass it over to Kelly Dowdle, who is a policy and research specialist with Momentum in Calgary. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thanks, Risa. So the rationale behind this policy priority around workforce development funding really comes from the necessity that we're seeing with high and potentially prolonged unemployment. So we're looking to ensure that investments in employment training reach those who are most in need. And for us, especially, that means those who have already faced barriers to the workforce prior to the COVID pandemic and are likely to face even more as the different regions around the country rebuild their economies. So this includes individuals with low educational attainment, women, immigrants, Indigenous persons, young men, particularly here in Alberta, and the long-term unemployed. So the federal government transferred $3.4 billion to provinces and territories this fiscal year through the labor market development agreements and the workforce development agreements. And they recently announced an an additional transfer of $1.5 billion in workforce development funding to support training for those hardest hit by the pandemic to quickly access supports and re-enter the workforce. So the kinds of supports that we're talking about include skills training, on-the-job training, employer-sponsored training, financial assistance and benefits, employment counseling and services, and job opportunities, bridging to job opportunities. The provinces and territories are responsible for setting the priorities and designing the program criteria in order to allocate these funds. And so what we're doing here in Alberta, Momentum has partnered with several community employment training organizations and other partners in Calgary and in Alberta to share some recommendations, develop recommendations and share them with provincial ministries to ensure that these investments help people with barriers to the workforce to learn the in-demand skills, secure stable employment, and contribute to our province's future economic prosperity. So you'll be receiving these slides through RAISA after we're all done, but the links there are two of our recent policy briefs that summarize these recommendations. And they include following the lead of provinces like British Columbia to redesign the Canada Job Grant Program. So here in Alberta, the Canada-Alberta Job Grant Program, the majority of the funding for it has gone, like 99%, almost all of the funding for it has gone to people who already had employment. And the intent of the program is to also reach people who are unemployed and underemployed. So we've proposed some recommendations as to how to redesign it in order to reach people with those barriers to employment. In addition to following the lead of provinces like Ontario that have specified or carved out portions of the Canada-Alberta or the Canada Job Grant funding to focus on small employers, small and medium enterprises. So that's one suite of program redesign recommendations that we're putting forward. And then we've published in our second brief some recommendations to increase investment in work integrated training programs. So these programs have a really strong track record for bridging people with barriers to employment to good jobs. In general, in Alberta, most of the employment training opportunities have sort of a 70% success rate of people having employment within 180 days of completing the program. And work integrated training programs have a much higher success rate. We have examples from community partners where, if they're going through a business accounting program for immigrants, 95% of people at the end of that have employment at the end of it. And we see those similar rates with Momentum's programs with, 80 to 85% employment rate after the fact. And so we're wanting, our provincial government to focus the investments on those kinds of programs to make sure that no one's left behind.
Great.
Rebuild our economy.
Great. Thank you, Kelly, very much. So then I'm gonna move to Sheeny Harrison, who is the policy analyst with the Ontario Nonprofit Network, to talk about the sixth policy area. Go ahead, Sheeny.
Thank you, Raisa. I think one of the things that Kelly did was set up the foundation for what type of work do we want. And so this is what decent work tries to achieve. So it's defined by the International Labour Organization as opportunities to obtain decent and productive work in conditions of freedom, equity, security, and human dignity. So for us at ONN, it's important to think about how the nonprofit sector encourages and creates a decent work culture. And this is just a way and a lens to think about how we make sure that work is fair, equitable, and stable. And given kind of the overview of the introduction and the conditions around COVID, we've seen just an exacerbation of issues around precarious employment, income inequality, and just overall weakened labor protections. So for us at ONN, the important part was to focus on how do we obviously change that in the sector, and particularly what is a woman majority sector. So that's what we've been focusing on to date. So we work with our members and our network partners to kind of support the development of a decent work culture within their organizations by providing decent work language, resources, tools, and helping them try to embed them in their organizations through engaging with their boards or their funders. And those funders can be government or foundations. And one tool of that is, say, funding agreements. Do funding agreements encourage decent work practices? Is core funding attached to actually sustain the practices in the organization? Another part of our work is advocacy. And so as a part of kind of federal provincial recovery planning, right now we're looking at ensuring that there's a nonprofit lens on any policies that are going to be put into place. And this includes advocating for decent work policies that create the condition for a decent work movement to happen across the nonprofit sector. So across the table, we've been looking at EI, the impact of childcare, pay equity. We're also looking at influencing the influencers currently that are that are currently addressing the issues of women's economic employment, given what we've seen with COVID around this she session. And I will say that that was coined by economist Armin Yalnizyan, because we've seen the impacts of COVID on women particularly. So these are the types of activities that we're doing at ONN. Right now, we have a top-up fund survey in the field. So this is to address kind of gaps in EI. And we're proposing a pooled top-up fund across the nonprofit sector that would bridge that gap to ensure that there is decent work, and that if employees need more funding other than what EI already provides, they can have that available. So that's generally what we do. And if you have any questions or would like to know more about the activities that are happening in terms of decent work at ONN, please just check out our website, and I will share whatever resources I can with Raisa to share with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tashini. Okay, so for the seventh and final policy area, it's broadband internet, and it's going to be me talking about this one. COVID has really shown us that, I mean, since we've been moving everything online, or a lot of things online, access to the internet and access to high quality, high speed internet is very important. And so our policy recommendation in this one is to accelerate the timeline of the Universal Broadband Fund and to use it to encourage community owned broadband. So this is a new priority for CCEDNet that, like I said, has just kind of come up kind of in the COVID context. So what we've been doing so far is connecting with other active organizations in this realm. So the Regional and Rural Broadband Project and Open Media are both active in this area. And so the government has made, federal government has made an announcement about this just earlier this month, I believe, about they are accelerating the timeline of the Universal Broadband Fund, which is fantastic. However, the second part there, the community-owned broadband, is much more complex than I knew, at least, and it's not part of the conversation at all. So having both the infrastructure and the distribution of the service to be community owned is another area, I guess, that we'll be focusing on more. So those are our 7 priorities, and I want to do a big shout out to all the speakers who all stayed within the time allocation. So that's awesome, you guys. Thank you so much. So we'll have a chance for questions in just a second, but I do want to talk a little bit about getting involved. So how you all can get involved with these policy priorities or others. So there's a few different ideas we're going to throw out here. So one is to talk to or write to your elected officials about these priorities. So one of them, if there's one of them that resonates most with you, or all of them. The social innovation and social finance one, as I mentioned near the beginning, we do have a campaign right now with a really easy automated email that you can send to your elected officials at that website, sisfs.ca. But you're welcome to talk to your elected officials about whatever is on your mind, or whatever policy priorities you think are important to strengthen community economies. And yeah, we just want to get more people active in the advocacy realm and provide tools for you all to do that. Another thing you can do is reach out to our members that are active on these files. So all of the people you've heard speaking today, if you're interested in that particular area, please reach out to them. We'll share their email addresses here in a second, and learn more. Check out their websites and find out how you can help. Thanks, Hannah, for sharing those email addresses in the chat. You can also join CCEDNet. So you can, if you join CCEDNet, then you're also eligible to join our policy council to be part of these conversations. And as well, you'll be, if you join CCEDNet, or if you're already a member, just a heads up that we're going to be launching a members only webinar and campfire chat capacity building series specifically around policy and advocacy work to help people build skills in those areas. And then of course, just watch our website or the websites of our different partners to contribute your voice to whatever's happens to be happening at the time. So I think with that, and there's those email addresses again, I'll open it up. We have a few minutes. Well, actually we do have some time for questions. So I think what I'll do is stop the screen share and see if anyone has a question that they want to ask. So you can either type a question into the chat or just get my attention somehow.
Martin and Melanie posted one just about in terms of progress and responses, how that's going so far.
Sure. So I don't know, Martin and Melanie, if you had anything, any of them in particular that you were interested in. I'll just a little bit on social innovation, social finance, and then I'll see if anyone else has comments on theirs. So there is, so the government on social innovation and social finance, all the right things are being said. Minister Hassan, who's the minister of ESDC, is supportive. The civil servants are supportive. We've been working a lot with the MP from Whitby, Ryan Turnbull, who's an internal champion for the file. So everything sounds really good, but yet things are not moving. So that's a bit of a challenge to try to figure out what the next move is. But I'll open it up if anyone else wants to speak about sort of what the response has been from government on any of your issues. Yeah, go ahead, Hazel.
Yeah, I would just say it's a bit similar with us, where the response has been really quite positive, but I sense that they want to sort of put it into the mix of what they're deciding as all the economic recovery programming.
Did anyone else want to speak to that, or we have another?
Yeah, it's Guy Downsey out here on Vancouver Island. Do you have a nice, easy cut and paste letter that you can send us so we can whip off to our MPs?
Yes, so that website for the social innovation, social finance, there is, it's really easy. It's there on the website. You just put in your name, or you can just copy and paste it. So I'll share that link again in the chat here.
Thanks.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? You can share in the chat if you like, or just get my attention. And thanks, Mike, for sharing that link. So if there's no other questions, we did have a question for all of you. So we'd love to hear, if anyone is brave enough to speak, we'd love to hear which of the different policy priorities that we've talked about today, is there any that particularly resonates for you, or that would be particularly helpful that you could see being particularly helpful in your community as part of a COVID recovery effort?
I'll jump in.
Sure.
Over on Vancouver Island, I think to me the piece that's got real juice is the combine the worker right to buy out a failing company and the community right to buy out a failing business. And so right now it's not on anyone's agenda. So in Victoria, in Cabra Bay, there was a gas station that where the owner, the company was sold to an incoming Chinese company, and then who closed it down because they were purely doing it as a scam. So the community's lost its gas station. And if that had been listed in the same way that Britain is doing with an essential community enterprise, it had a category called, this is an essential community enterprise, so that the community would have a legal right to first right of refusal to purchase that business and run it under community ownership. It's an idea that makes such common sense, but it's not anywhere in circulation in any kind of local discussions in the local paper. That people just complain and say, it's so sad we lost our gas station, blah, blah, blah. And similarly for companies, whether they're struggling because of COVID or whether because the owners simply don't have any retirement plans and they just would shut them down, to get widespread acceptance for the idea that the workers have a legal right to go for first right of refusal and the financing to enable them to have 10-year financing to buy the company off the owners. It's such a big idea that it needs to have much bigger profile across Canada, I think.
Hazel, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, for sure. Of course, I agree. And thank you very much for that. Yeah, I mean, the whole notion of right of first refusal or right to bid, I mean, that would be a great addition, but it really seems that without there being some noticeable resources to be able to do this, there's not a whole lot of point anyway. I mean, that's sort of where we started, but both are definitely needed. And
so just to follow up, I mean, in addition to a federal fund, since the financing should be loan repayable, do you have a thought to work with credit unions or community banks, which we don't have yet, to do so? So Van City, which is a huge credit union out here on the West Coast, if they could be persuaded to set up a fund internally to finance such a transition. Have you gone down that route?
Yes. We're very interested in working with credit unions. We have spoken with Van City. I know that they do have interest. We haven't explored the idea of doing that instead of the fund combined with them, because I think it's going to take a whole variety of financial sources, and we may need to be partnering with the community investment fund people as well as the credit unions and so on.
Yeah. Cool.
But yes, that's an important part.
If I could just jump in there, I mean, there is quite a lot of experience in, particularly in France and in Italy, with this kind of legislation, where it was packaged together with the support for the buyouts, so that it has to come as a package in the legislation that allows this.
Yeah. And are you linking up with the 50 by 50 in America, who are working for a 50 million employee ownership by 2050?
Yes, we know them. Yes, thanks.
Okay, similar goal.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Thanks, Guy and Roger. Is there anyone else that wants to share anything that particularly resonated with you that you think would be helpful in your community? If not,
I'd like to, sorry, if I could,
yeah.
I had another question for Hazel.
Sure.
In terms of how we define a multi-stakeholder co-op, can you give some examples of this? Like the co-ops that I'm involved with are what you call user financing co-ops. In other words, these are involve community investment funds then being spent on projects where the people in the projects are also members of the co-op. So these are kind of relatively new, and I think there needs to be maybe a little more kind of advertising about what those co-ops look like, and the kind of combinations of workers, users, and investors can work as a co-op.
Yeah, well, I guess I've noticed that Laura has also put into the chat that the Solidarity Co-op model in Quebec has done very well in those situations. And basically that is the phraseology for multi-stakeholder co-op in Quebec. And I think in Quebec, there are lots of home care co-ops that are on the Solidarity Co-op model, the multi-stakeholder co-op model. I can't rattle off a bunch of examples, but certainly the idea is to bring in the users, the workers, investors, other kinds of community partners, and it's a strong way to start off, I would say.
It seems to be relatively new to the co-op sector itself, where traditionally these kind of co-ops are not part of the co-op sector. So I think there's maybe some work to do there to try to bring these kind of co-ops into the wider co-op movement.
Yes, it's definitely a newer type. Some provinces have just recently gotten it into their legislation. I think New Brunswick is one example of that. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Roger. Anyone else? Oh, Leslie, you just turned your camera on. Did you want to share an idea?
Right.
Oh, we can't hear you, Leslie. You have to unmute yourself.
I should know that. Yes, just to build on what people are saying, I think finding some way to connect some of the ideas in the community investment funds and the capacity building process and community readiness and so on is really important as we move toward conversions to worker ownership, both in terms of whether we want to move with whether communities are interested in the multi-stakeholder model, so that there's community capacity there as well, but also, of course, as is built in, but the idea of using co-op educators and people who are experienced with co-ops to help those who are making the conversion. Certainly in Nova Scotia, some of the, I won't say failures because people learned a lot, but some of the problems I think, could have been averted had we been able to build in some of those other kinds of capacity building.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, actually. I was just thinking about, so my name's Janet, I'm with the Women's Economic Council, and I was just thinking about something that one of the colleagues mentioned to me the other day. They're trying to get a co-op going where she is for mostly newcomer women to start their own daycares. And it turns out that there is legislation where they are to prevent women in subsidized public housing from running their own daycares. And So I was shocked. Apparently this isn't unusual. Another colleague said, yes, it's similar where she is too. So as we think about building capacity and looking at some of the barriers that we're facing, certainly for women, in this particular instance, I'm sure there are many other examples for other people, but we also have to drill down a bit before we get going to see what we're going to be facing down the road there.
Thanks, Janet. It's a great piece of info.
Yeah, I wanted to jump onto that. I think it ties a little bit with decent work, because right now, and the planning that the federal government has going on around the Women's Economic Action Plan that they're trying to put together, and really thinking about kind of the dynamics and challenges women face, or what people in women majority sectors face as they go through this, in addition to kind of the legislation. What are the conversations you're having? What are the things that the government has to change and shift to ensure that women in particular have decent work? And what are those conditions? And how is that tied into pieces of legislation rather than blocking that from happening? I know particularly for people who are on OW or ODSP here in Ontario, if you were to give them money, a lump sum of money, the government will just pull it right away if it's too much from what they're already receiving, which for me means that the institutions at hand are actually maintaining systems of inequality and pushing people to remain in these positions, whether positions that are not allowing them to kind of reach their full potential and thrive in the economy. So it's really thinking about the dynamics, the intersections, and also kind of the institutional structures and the cultures that shape them. Because if we don't think about the cultures that shape these institutions, we're not going to be able to kind of take it apart piece by piece in the way that it needs to be shaped.
Thanks, Tashini. All right, anyone else have ideas that they want to share? So if not, I think, oh, I have a chat from Mike. Mike, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Just if we have a minute to come back to the question from Martin and Melanie, in addition to, you know, SISF and worker ownership, where there's seems to be good rhetoric and not a lot of action currently, I would also add, I noticed Wendy put her camera back on. I wondered if she was going to ask or hop in on the conversation around business succession, community ownership, and community finance, because there's an interesting conjunction of work that's going on there. But from my experience, I think other pieces where there is a lot of traction and interest still is especially social procurement. And David, you know, is working really hard to keep up with that. That was one of the few mentions we got in the throne speech this fall. And so there's definite, I think, interest or movement there. And around community investment funds, that tends to be more of a provincial jurisdiction, I think, at least the tax credits and the securities regulations. But, you know, building on the Nova Scotia model where there is a long track record, in recent years, we've seen a gradual progression through PEI, New Brunswick. Alberta had one for a year and a half, and it's been, you know, we lost it. But even in BC and Ontario, I think there's interest. So I do see good progress and definitely a lot of energy on the ground around community investment. And so when we talk about capital needs for community ownership and the succession requirements of business transition, I think there's a lot of interesting prospects there.
Wendy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. And that's certainly the experience that we're having here. So, you know, in order for business succession to happen into employee ownership, or for diverse communities to be able to make that leap, and you know, there's traditional banks you cannot go to, and so we need alternative ways of funding. And certainly the experience here in the Maritimes is that those are more likely the types of businesses that get invested in, and there's tremendous opportunity for business succession. We're working on a number of projects here right now that is feeding into that. And so that's a part of, I guess, we see the ecosystem. And the other piece is, you know, sort of to what David was speaking about around social procurement, but also local procurement. And so we're working closely with the governments to see if they can shift, and actually they're very open to this, shifting a portion of their procurement spending, their tendering process to co-ops and social enterprise with special conditions around it for needing to build local capacity, to be inclusive and diverse and so on. So I think that all those things tie very closely together in, you know, in creating this ecosystem that will help us move some of these, you know, projects forward. And business succession it already had tremendous potential. We had crises before COVID. All the research right now is showing that many other businesses, not only are they closing, you know, because of COVID, but also business owners that had planned to retire in 5 years from now are saying, no, like now is the time we're going to get out. So the whole crisis is being exacerbated, and it's not something that we're seeing a lot of people talk about, but we think that the opportunity is tremendous, and that these community investment funds are one of the ways to help make that happen.
David, did I see you with your hand up? Yeah.
So I just want to raise a policy issue that the Social Enterprise Council has been pushing since 2008, which is called Level the Playing Field. We keep talking about new money. We don't put enough emphasis, I don't think, on the existing programs that do not allow access to the resources. The Business Development Bank of Canada will not make loans to co-ops and nonprofits unless someone is willing to personally sign. That's a federal crown corporation that is illegitimately, in my mind, excluding a significant part of the economy that is, as we talk today, this is the emerging resolution, and they are eliminated. Futurepreneur, another federally funded program, only will invest and make loans to individuals. Community Futures and all of the development agencies are really, really expected to, and it's in their contracts, but there's no requirement or any regulatory kind of framework that says report out on your investment in diverse businesses, in social enterprises, in co-ops. So I think one of the things all the time when we're asking not only for new resources and legislative changes that may be needed, one of the things we've got to continue, I think, to work on is that there's a lot of existing programs and financing that was created over the last 50 years, but created in a different marketplace. It didn't look at a social economy. It looked at a private economy. And we've invested significant, even all of the money into the infrastructure bank. None of that is actually available to community. And that's billions and billions of existing dollars. And if we don't continue to pound on that door, I think that to me is easier access than new funding, especially given the fact that, you know, the Prime Minister said last week, with all this spending, it's limited resources. We're going to have to start making choices. My point is, there's lots of resources you're already spending. Let's leverage them to the maximum community value, not privatize them for a certain sector.
Great. Thanks, David. So I think I'm going to end the conversation there, but thank you all for your contributions. Very robust conversation. I just want to end with a poll. So we want to get a sense of what types of future webinars or future offerings folks would be interested in. So Hannah's going to put up a poll here in a second, and just look at the list of potential offerings and pick the one or ones, you can pick more than one, that are most interesting to you. And then we'll take a look at where people's interests are. Hannah, are you putting up the poll?
Poll is up. I'm not sure if anyone else can see it. It looks like we have 10, 11
yeah, okay, great.
people voting.
I can see it, I'm thinking.
It might be that if you're a co-host on the webinar, you cannot see it. Sometimes Zoom has glitches in that way.
Yeah, I can't see
Mike,
it,
you're not allowed to vote.
If everyone else can see it, that's great.
It's just like if you were in Michigan.
Just give 15 seconds more.
All right, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to see it when the results come up.
The results are here. Maybe I'll just speak to them. We have 16% interested in a webinar on Advocacy 101, 58% on webinar on the power of partnerships, 16% on the webinar on creating an internal advocacy policy, 37% for campfire chat on government relations, 26% for a campfire chat on working with partners, 42% for campfire chat on building effective coalitions, and 26% for using the media in your campaign.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hannah. So that's excellent. And it was actually a trick question because all of those things are coming up over the next few months. So whichever ones you said you're interested in, you will be able to participate in them. We'll be launching this series. I'm just going to share a link in the chat, which is going to show you the dates and the upcoming times for all of those things. And just an FYI, you do have to be a CCEDNet member to participate. So if you're not, I would encourage you to join. And we do have a barrier-free membership policy, so it shouldn't be a problem for anyone. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our speakers for your great contributions. And one final thing we're going to ask you to do is to please, Hannah just shared another link in the chat, which is an evaluation form, which just has a few questions. We'd love to hear your feedback about today's session because that will help us do better for future sessions. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good day.